to New York.
Mm-hmm.
Boston? Yeah, I think that was it, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe Providence to New York. I think maybe going down the coast. I mean, that was one
Right.
way rather than taking the train that...
Mm-hmm. All the way around Long Island?
Well, no, it could have gone through the north of Long Island
Uh-huh.
and gone. I really don't know, but,
Yeah.
but he did have that. Anyway, so where are we now?
So back to when I interrupted you, you were talking about how your mother was very strong when your father was going through this depressed period, and how she kind of took
because
over.
we were totally wiped out
Mm-hmm.
financially, and
Mm-hmm.
here we were living in this very beautiful place. Of course, no servants.
Mm-hmm.
We did have one little black sort of rattle-trapple Chevy automobile. This was in a neighborhood where most of my friends' parents had these great limousines
Mm-hmm.
with chauffeurs,
Mm-hmm.
and you would sit in the back and you would push a little button,
Mm-hmm.
and the glass would go up between you and the chauffeur so he couldn't hear what you were
Mm-hmm.
saying, and there would be jump seats and things like that. But most of my friends had cars like that, plus other cars too.
Mm-hmm.
And we had this ratty little black Chevy. I remember we often had to push it to get it started and things. And you know, for a couple who had and the costume trunk
Mm-hmm.
was filled with these beautiful, beautiful evening clothes that my mother had worn to when they would go to the opera, the theater, be entertained in Spain or France or
Mm-hmm.
wherever. Really elegant, beautiful, beautiful clothes. And then to have to be reduced to being, you know, a drudge.
Mm-hmm. And after your dad was going through this depression, how soon did she decide to start a school?
Well, the school thing came about because in the town of, I mean, you know, I always go back to 1066, but my brother and sister had both been, Anne had been at the Greenwich Academy,
Mm-hmm.
and Uncle John at the Brunswick School. These were the two best
Mm-hmm.
all-girls school, all-boys school
Mm-hmm.
in Greenwich, and then the crash came, and things were really terrible. But they both were very good students,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, kind of stars in their school, so they both got scholarships to go. My family had no money for them to go at all. So they got scholarships, and then I came along. They both, it wasn't just easy going. I think there were a couple of years when neither of them were at those schools, but then the schools offered the scholarships and got them back. And when it was time for me to go to school, when I was 5, Mother took me to the Havemeyer School on Greenwich Avenue. Never knew a soul the entire time I lived in Greenwich who ever went to a public school. It was not the kind of town where the nice people went to public schools. But there was no choice for me because I was so much younger. I hadn't been to school. And she took me to the Havemeyer School and enrolled me in the first grade. And they wouldn't let me stay in the first grade because I was only 5 years old. You had to be 6 to be in the first grade. And I already knew how to read.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, too bad, she has to be in kindergarten.
Right.
Mother was outraged, so she yanked me out of school. She had taught me to read.
Right.
And she yanked me out of school. And in our very beautiful house, there was a room called the children's dining room, and that's what it was used for, and there were a lot of servants and everything around, and it was considerably larger than this space here. And some of the mothers of some of my friends said, oh, because Mother was going to teach me, and they said, well, why don't you teach our daughters too? And so she started a little school there, and they paid for it. I remember, and it was actually coming in through the children's dining room. I remember Aunt Rose coming with armfuls of groceries because we had no food to eat. I mean, quite literally, no food.
Did she live nearby?
She lived on the other side of Greenwich, and she and her husband, Uncle Jimmy, who was a railroad man of some sort, Lehigh Valley Railroad. Boy,
Did they have children?
They had one, our first cousin, our only first cousin, Mary Jane. Are you cold?
No, I just...
Because there are all kinds of warm things.
No,
or
good.
we could move to...
I'm fine. I just pulled down this.
Okay. Mary Jane was, I think, about a year older than Banana. So those two were sometimes close. Not too close, though Mary Jane, I think, also went to the Greenwich Academy. And I don't know, I never... obviously, Aunt Rose was very kind, but I don't think... And we would see Aunt Rose and Uncle Jimmy from time to time. But Mother and Daddy really didn't have all that much
in common
with them. Anyway, so the school grew, and we stayed... I don't remember how many students there were. There were boys, some boys, as well as girls, and it had gotten a good enough reputation, word of mouth.
Right.
There was nothing printed or anything like that. And I don't know, I'm sure they didn't have rules in those days, but I'm sure there was no permissions or anything for her to be running this thing.
And did she teach all the courses and everything?
Yep.
Did she hire anyone?
Well, not while we were at 180 Otter Rock Drive, and I can remember nice things. I mean, she played the piano. We had this great, gorgeous big living room, beautifully, very simply but beautifully decorated. It had a huge, great big open space and the grand piano on one end, and she played the piano wonderfully, and dancing, just flitting around like crazy, and that. I do remember that with great pleasure. But then keeping that house going was really, really scary. We had no servants, and we had to do all the cleaning, and she had to do all the cooking and everything else, as well as teaching. And I think I was in the 5th grade when the bank came along and tacked the for sale foreclosure thing on the apple tree. And I do remember knowing that it was very hard for Mother at times, and the only time in my life I ever heard something like that happen was that one time something, and I don't remember what it was now, something that was so bad happened, and I heard her say, she wasn't in the room with me, but I heard her say, "Shit!" Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. But it was a terrible thing because the water company would call, telephone, and she would have me answer the telephone, and they would say, "Mrs. Teal there," and I'd say, "Well, I don't know, I'll have to go see. Who's calling, please?"
Right.
And then I'd go and find Mother, and she'd say, no, or the oil, people who delivered the oil or the coal or whatever it was, all the bill collectors. And then she would say, "Well, tell them I'm not here now, I'll call them back later." And I would have to go to the phone and lie over the phone and say, "Mrs. Teal isn't here right now. Could I take a message?"
Was Aunt Banana and Uncle John at boarding school then, or were they at
Uncle
home?
John went off to Newman School. He got a scholarship to boarding school.
So they weren't there during